going to be Forward for God's Sake Forward. John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, Part 11 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And I'm standing here, and right in front of me is the Major General John Fulton Reynolds monument, Esquire statue rather. And behind me is Paul's 2nd Maine Battery. Now, when John F. Reynolds leaves the Lutheran Theological Seminary, he comes in this direction, crosses the Chambersburg Pike, and again he sees Pegram's Confederate artillery to the west. Just to the right of the John Buford statue, you can see a red roof in the distance. That's the roof of Hare's Tavern today. Pegram's artillery is firing into Buford's exhausted cavalry troops here at 9:45 in the morning of July 1st, 1863, when Reynolds, coming from the seminary, personally places Lysander Cutler's brigade. Now, the 2nd Maine, Hall's battery, is actually at the back of the marching line. And they are forced to cut in front of the 147th New York Volunteers of Cutler's brigade to get to this position where John Reynolds personally places their guns right here where they sit today along the Chambersburg Pike. Now, the objective was to draw the fire from Buford's brigade while Reynolds' troops are getting in the line and while Buford's exhausted cavalry troops can be pulled out back into reserve so he can relieve them. This ends the placement of Cutler's brigade here. John Reynolds only has about 25 minutes to live, and we'll examine those last 25 minutes of his life in parts 12 and beyond. This has been Forward for God's Sake Forward, John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, Part 11 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Forward for God's Sake Forward, John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, Part 12, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. In our last video, we left off just in the distance in front of us where you can see the main battery. Now, John Reynolds rides in this direction over here, and when he gets here, he personally places the 95th New York Volunteers here at the Edward McPherson farm. Now, today you can see the McPherson barn in the distance. What many people don't realize, because most of the time it's overgrown, is there is a small marker to the 95th New York Infantry on July 1st, 1863. And then it says 10 a.m. Now, this is one of the least visited markers on the Gettysburg battlefield because usually it is overgrown. But it also gives a clue, and the clue is 10 a.m. John F. Reynolds is still alive at 10 a.m. in the morning on July 1st, 1863. From there, he rides, as we walk now, over toward the 84th New York, which is also known as the 14th Brooklyn. Now, when he gets over here, he has a conversation with Colonel Fowler. Now, no one today knows exactly what was spoken by John F. Reynolds, Major General John F. Reynolds, to Colonel Fowler at about 10:03 in the morning of July 3rd, 1863. Because remember, he does place the 95th New York at 10 a.m., after placing Lysander Cutler's brigade and the main battery on the Chambersburg Pike. He rides over here, and just within a few minutes, he has a conversation with Captain Fowler. And most likely, that conversation were orders of what would happen in battle. No one knows that for sure, but from this point here, from the 14th Brooklyn and the conversation with Colonel Fowler, John Reynolds then rides off in this direction along Herbst Woods, and then over there in that spot would be the end of his life on the morning of July 1st, 1863. This has been Forward for God's Sake Forward, John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, Part 12 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Forward for God's Sake Forward, John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, Part 13 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And I have a few notes I want to read from here on this part. It was here, in this spot, that Major General John Fulton Reynolds was placing the Iron Brigade about 10:05 on the morning of July 1st, 1863. Now, the men of the Iron Brigade were coming from where the camera is facing toward me in a southeasterly direction. John Reynolds, riding right here, says, "Forward into line, forward at the double quick, forward men, and drive those fellows out of that wood." Now, the brigade paused right here and began to load their weapons. As they reached this area in echelon, they collided with Archer's brigade in the woods right over here. Now, Archer's brigade fired one volley, and that first volley killed 75 men from the 2nd Wisconsin. Lieutenant Colonel George Stevens was killed. Lieutenant Lucius Fairchild lost his left arm. Now, it's at this point that the story and the mystery of John F. Reynolds' death becomes very critical. As this brigade, coming in echelon of the Iron Brigade, passes him and collides with Archer's brigade, the 2nd Wisconsin passes Reynolds. And that's really important. As soon as they pass Reynolds, he's turned in the saddle. So he's riding, he turns in the saddle with his back facing Herbst Woods, and instantly a ball from a downward trajectory hits him behind the head and the ear and knocks him off his horse, killing him instantly. In our next part, we will talk about the controversial death spot of John F. Reynolds and its most likely location. This has been Forward, for God's sake, Forward, John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, Part 13, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. For God's sake, Forward, John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, Part 14, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And we're going to talk about the controversial death spot of Major General John Fulton Reynolds, who was killed here on July 1st, 1863, around 10:15 in the morning. Now, we just left off as the 2nd Wisconsin passed Major General Reynolds. He turns in the saddle. He's struck as he turns from behind the back of the head by a bullet, a mini ball that instantly killed him. And over the years, the spot where he was actually killed has been debated. However, some of the biggest clues are the placement of the monument and 4 photographs that were taken between the years 1866 and 1880. Now, the monument, which you see in the distance to John Reynolds, sits about 30 yards away from where I'm standing. That monument was dedicated in 1886, and it marks the general vicinity of where Major General John Fulton Reynolds was killed. However, there were no living eyewitnesses to Major General John Reynolds' death at that time. In fact, his orderly, Charles Henry Vail, was not alive when that monument was dedicated. So we got to go back to Charles Henry Vail and the photographs that were taken. The first photograph was taken by Hanson Weaver in 1866. And it's taken from about where the camera is right now, looking in this direction. And it's a tree that sits right here today, where the right flank marker of the 151st Pennsylvania is. And on that tree is carved an R. The other 3 photographs that are taken later on, up to the 1880s, are taken closer to the vicinity of where the monument is today. And all 3 of those photographs have signs or a headboard laying at the base of a tree that says, "Here fell General Reynolds." But one of the most important documents was a letter that Charles Vail, the eyewitness to John Reynolds' death, wrote to lawyer David McConaughey in 1864, and he writes, "While in Gettysburg recently, I was at the spot where General Reynolds fell. I think you will have no difficulty finding it. It is a large white oak tree on which I cut a large letter R. Nearby, in the distance, stands a smaller oak tree in which I also cut a letter R. The other photos, like I said, have signs nailed to them that say, "Here General Reynolds fell," or a headboard at the base of the tree. However, the Hanson Weaver photograph, which is taken right where my camera is today, depicts the large oak tree standing right here today where the right flank marker of the 151st Pennsylvania is, that has a letter R carved in it. And Vail writes, less than 1 year after Gettysburg, to a lawyer here in Gettysburg, that is the spot where Major General John Fulton Reynolds was killed on the morning of July 1st, 1863. So it is my belief that right here, where this right flank marker sits, is where the real monument to John F. Reynolds' death, not the monument that was placed in 1886 in the general vicinity, should be. This is the spot right here where Major General John Fulton Reynolds' life ended on July 1st, 1863. This has been Forward, for God's sake Forward, Part 14, John F. Reynolds at Gettysburg, on Gettysburg.